The February Cup finals are underway, and it looks like Rynus, with the exception of Prankster Gangster, is undefeatedly trouncing his way through the finals. He's even up 2 games right now over Works, who took a path into the losers bracket and then came back up through the losers bracket into the losers finals and ended up winning against Prankster Gangster to meet Rynus as his opponent. And so this conversation has been talked about over and over, but it's kind of whispered in Twitch and in chats and in conversations and behind Discord, voice chats, is that Mech is too strong. Mech is overpowered. And what does it mean to be overpowered? Rather than talk about Mech or Beast or Rax, we're going to talk about what it means for something to be overpowered, how you would even define it, because most people don't have a strong definition of overpowered. What overpowered means to most people is as follows. I can't beat that, I don't know how to beat that, and I don't think anyone else can beat that, or should be able to beat that. Therefore, it's overpowered. So let's talk about some ways you can conceptualize overpoweredness, right? First way, it requires way less effort to execute than it does to defend. This could be an excellent definition, because what we're getting at here then is the skill disparity that is required between people, between players. If it takes one energy of effort, let's say, one energy of effort to, let's say, do a 2015-2016 catapult drop, when catapults 2-shot workers, and it takes 6 energy units to defend against catapult drops, perhaps this is what people mean by overpowered. The effort that's required in expenditure relative to what my opponent has to do is too high. Okay, here's another way that we can go about overpowered. Is overpowered, the meta hasn't found a solution for this. The meta, the most efficient tactic available, the meta game of people coming up with new ways to win a game, has kind of stopped. It's reached a point where this seems to be the pinnacle. So if the meta game is stale, or stops, or it seems that something can't be overpowered, or overcome, I should say, does that mean that it's overpowered? There's another way that we can look at overpowered, which is the idea from fighting games of overtuning. Let's say that something has its design rule is fine. It doesn't require too much effort, more effort to defend or to attack into than vice versa, right? The tactic isn't easier to execute on one end than it is to defend on the other, and it's not stopped and stale inside of the meta, but maybe the numbers are too out of whack. So an example for a little war game, hypothetically, what if workers had 1,000,000 hit points? We would say that that's overpowered, but what we really mean is overtuned. So let's kind of break all of these down and talk about what it means for something to be overpowered, and then provide some counterexamples for whether or not something is, in fact, overpowered the way that most people conceive of the term. So let's talk about the energy expenditure. It takes more energy to defend than it does to execute. This typically follows the following line. If it takes, APM is a resource in the game, actions per minute. People have a definite hand speed and a limitation on the actions that they can take. If it is disproportionately more difficult for you to stop than it is for me to execute, then it's overpowered, because it is too powerful by nature of the force that's required for you to block or to defend. But is that necessarily the case? There are many instances in chess, for instance, of gambits. And gambits typically involve themselves in the following way. I'm going to sacrifice a piece or make an opening or do something that's going to give up some material, and in exchange I will have a very powerful tactic headed your way. And if you allow this, if you enable this, if this is allowed to continue, then the tactic will prove to put me in a much better position, and it will be very difficult for you to prove that I'm not in an advantageous state. One example would be the Evans Gambit. You sacrifice a pawn, you get a lot of units that go out and explode, and all of your pieces are activated and active and have lines of control throughout the entire board, while your opponent is cramped in, and the sacrifice of one pawn seems unnecessary, or almost as if it was nothing because of the tempo that you gave. Okay, let's talk about catapults in 2015-2016. The energy required to execute a catapult was way less than the energy required to defend a catapult, for catapults usually came in an airship that would drop them, and at that time catapults 2-shot all of the workers without an upgrade. So if the catapults drop, they kill the workers. Now there is counterplay there. This idea of energy expenditure in what is overpowered doesn't take into account that there is counterplay. But it does say that the counterplay is too difficult or too limited or causes too many problems. Okay, here's the problem with that. Energy expenditure is based on the idea, fundamentally, that there is a limit on actions per minute that you can perform. So we would say, if we take on this definition of overpowered, something, we'll tweak it slightly. I'll tweak it slightly. Instead of saying something is overpowered if it takes more energy to defend than it does to attack, because, spoiler, it always takes more energy to defend than it does to attack, it tends to be the case that when you are attacking, you are more active, you are making moves on the map, you are in control of the tempo of the game, your tactic is in control of the state of the game. Your goal in instituting that tactic is to overwhelm the limits of the human player on the other side. And so, is the fact that there is an energy requirement or disparate capability there proof that it's overpowered? I would say it is only overpowered in the case that people can expand the energy required from them. So we're talking about the skill ceiling and floor of the tactic. If a unit costs 1 energy, and that's the tactic, it takes 1 energy to implement, and let's say 6 to defend. But you can't improve the 1. The 1 is just stuck at 1 energy unit. You can't use your skill to give it 2 or 3 energy units and increase it. But the defense for your opponent is on this, requires a 6 of energy to block. It's going to seem overpowered to people who can only muster by APM, mechanics, game familiarity, a 4 or a 5 in energy. Because all the players who only can operate at 5 energy and bring it to bear, the fact that they need 6 energy to stop this 1 tactic means that it is overpowering them. But it's not overpowered globally, because they can improve their skill on that. So for instance, let's go back to the example of airships and catapult drops. Is it true that catapults 2-shot workers? Yes. Did that cause a lot of games to end very badly for people who didn't have the APM, the hand speed, the mechanics, or the know-how of how to play around it? Yes, it absolutely did. But high-level games between players used the fact that this was the case, that instituting the tactic was a 1 or a 2, let's say, and they were capable of mustering this 6 or 7 level of energy to defend, and they were able to even improve their skills to the point that we had things like airships would move, drop a ballista, move, drop a ballista, move, drop a ballista without stopping. These are new skills that were discovered, hotkeying the catapults that are inside of the airship, and so actually this version of overpowered may be overpowered in the sense that it is overpowering the player that is defending against it, but that's a function of the player's skill. Okay, let's go into the third item. Let's say that something is overtuned. Its numbers or its values are too large. Okay, so let's get into that. Let's say the number for the worker is that it literally has 1 million hit points. Is the worker health overtuned? Yes, it frankly is, because 1 million health predisposes it to becoming now one of the best attacking units in the game. It's very, very good at rushing. It changes the entire metagame. But that's the focus, right? Is that when you're talking about overpowered, you're always talking about overpowered in the context of the broader metagame. You're not talking about it with respect to the specific instance. Yes, it would be probably a bad design choice for AC or anyone else on the development team to change the value of hit points for workers to 1 million. But if they did change the value of hit points on workers to 1 million, you can guarantee that the metagame would evolve. In fact, the original broken tactics that we currently use that are effective, such as 1-Rax Raider Harass, 2-Rax Proxy Raider, maybe Proxy Double Workshop, those things wouldn't be quite as powerful, or wouldn't seem quite as powerful because of the health of the workers involved. Maybe Catapult Drops wouldn't be as good because now it takes literally thousands of hits to go ahead and kill the worker. But it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be new tactics that would evolve. It just means that anyone who's playing that older style of we're just going to make raiders and catapults and attack other people's workers as a way of farming their economy would be inefficient. And what people are complaining about with overtuning is that their previous tactics that were efficient have become inefficient, or they've become comparatively less powerful than they used to be. And so is it overpowered? Even in the extreme case that a worker has 1 million hit points, it is overpowered, but its overpoweredness generates changes in the meta that take advantage of it. Because the metagame is an equilibrium state. It takes the things that already exist in the game and between high-level players, and it breaks them down and redefines the game in the eyes and imagination of top players. That's what the metagame is. The metagame is not a thing that was ever sat down and ironed out by a designer from on high, ever. The metagame exists the way that it does because top players, regardless of if it's a Little War game or any other game, are constantly pushing the boundaries and arguing, this is most efficient, no, this is most efficient, no, this is most efficient. And as they discover layers of the efficiency, you find that actually the conversation as to whether or not something is overtuned as balanced completely goes out of the way. In fact, this goes the other way, which is to say it will mask whether or not anything is overpowered and makes the game designer and balancer AC's job more difficult even. Because if something is that powerful, that tactics are built around it, strategies are built to incorporate it, the metagame of players will, in an effort to not lose, subsume the reality of that overtunedness and incorporate it into their play. And because they're doing that, they will make the game look more balanced than it is at their level of skill. This is something that famously happened in StarCraft Brood War, a game that you had a balance update in, 1998? Good luck with that. 2001, I think it was, that replays were added. Maybe it was 98. Good luck with that. You do realize that lurkers do incredible damage, right? You do realize that, Terrans can't expand, and they're garbage, and Protoss is really strong. Oh, wait a second. Years and years, and literally because the game didn't change, and the game was balanced around maps and the community side of it, the things that were in balance, first off, I know some commentators who say vultures, overpowered units. They glide so they don't trip their own mines, and then they come with 3 explosive mines that just say no, boom, area control, they move quickly, they do excellent damage against workers. Probably some people's candidate for the most overpowered unit. That or the tank, really, really, really strong units. Maybe people think that arbiters are overpowered, but they're just in a weaker faction or race. But the reality of how people incorporated the perhaps overtuned, perhaps undertuned nature of all of the unit structures and tactics in that game, built into the tactics and strategies that generated the metagame that made the game an esport that lasted for literally decades. With that, we're going to go to the final category that people use for overpowered, which is as follows. The metagame is stale. The metagame has been figured out. These are the optimal strategies. This is it. There's no limit to hit past that. Everyone agrees that this is what the case is. And the problem is that defining this as overpowered is actually in defiance to the concept I'm going to bring later, which is, if there is a concept called overpowered, it's brought to light by the most extreme people. It's brought to people who have brought out the absolute most of their skill, perhaps even theory crafted a new way to play the game, or they have put more time and effort into making sure the absolute best at certain abilities or certain actions or certain intricacies. So I'll bring it up this way. Let's just say it really. Let's just be frank. No one in Little War Game has hit the skill cap for Little War Game. Absolutely no one. Daz, no. AC, no. Yummy, blah, blah. Venny, Slammer 4, anyone that you can think of, Norm, me, anyone. Anyone that you respect as a player, anyone that you think has hit the top, anyone who thinks their theory crafting is perfect, it's never perfect. It's not. I have cast games. I've watched games between people, even high-level people. They do get supply block. They do make buildings in wonky fashion. Some people, I think, don't even incorporate what I call the human special. They treat the game like it's some other faction-based game where the races are cordoned off and you can't build anything. They don't want to take from this race and this faction and merge them together. They're stuck in older ways of thinking. And so the problem is the metagame stale. First off, Little War Game isn't at the point where the skill of the players even manages to get to the point where we can ask whether or not the metagame is stale. And then second off, if the metagame ever does become stale, it's not proof that the game is actually, 1, bad, 2, it's not because some people might, if it's stale, that's bad. Why is it bad? Why is it bad if it is a very filled out, defined metagame? See, most people think of the metagame as, the right thing to do is A, B, C, D, E, and their right thing to do is Z, Y, X, W, V, U, T. That's right, I can do the alphabet backwards because I'm running circles around people. So here's the thing about that. They think that it's point. That's not what happens. The metagame isn't built like that. It's built on a series of if, then this, then, if you do that, then this. Consider basic openings that I can show this. And then we'll go back to whether or not it's actually a bad thing and what the real point of that is. Okay, I talked to AC. His observation, whether it was in jest or not, it serves the point just fine, was that one den expansion is the best safe build. Done. That's his opinion. He is, by all accounts, one of the top 2 or 3 players in Little Wargame. If you are not generous and you don't believe that, he is at the very least top 5, and I fail to see how you can argue otherwise. Okay, and then he said, well, comma, Castle First Double Den is the best build. But obviously it dies to other builds. Now, here's the thing. One den, solid, safe expansion. The thing that's greedier than that, fast expansion, double den. It's even better. Doesn't even have to worry about a one den because you've got more wolves, you've got your production, you've got your expansion faster, you're going to mine more gold, you're pretty safe against that other build. What's the thing that puts this all in whack and defines it as a metagame, not as tick, tick, tick going up linearly, but as a circle of play and counterplay that people can practice? 2-Rax Raider. That may not even be the best example, but everyone who's watching this video knows. 2-Rax Raider, if you go Castle First, can mean, especially if it's proxied, you just lose the game. There's going to be raiders in there. You don't have any units except workers. Workers get 3-shot by all of these raiders that are going about and doing damage and just going and stabbing absolutely everything that they can and killing it. And so one den would be safer against that. Castle First is more economical than one den, but it loses to 2-Rax, and 2-Rax is obviously not going to have a fun time against one den, although they still have some advantages and something to play for there. So what's interesting is that shows the metagame, even if it were stale, let's say that those are the 3 main builds that everyone goes for. Does that really indicate that that's it? No, because as people have a stale metagame and they say this is that, this is that, this is that, there are different efficiencies against different builds. And let's say, okay, first off, let's go back to the initial point. Is the metagame stale in Little Wargame? Is it? Is it? Are you sure? Are we talking about the game where I saw people still experimenting with the Archer Catapult of 2015, still experimenting with Werewolf Snake, Werewolf Dragon? I saw Werewolf Dragon catapults in game 2, I believe, of Works versus Rynus on Stream Junction in a Mech versus Mech. I've seen people like Mr. Pankaka add their own benefits and their own flair where they show that mills are quite good in a way to build. We've gone from a metagame where people build Gatling guns and bring workers and use it to shove a Rax player who's on 1 Rax and fast expanding, to we've seen games now, maybe you just get the mill and you go from there. This idea that the metagame is stale also hides that people have different strengths and tendencies. What may be overpowered in general isn't overpowered for everyone. And here's why this feeds into the idea of whether or not it's overpowered. Well, it's overpowered if the metagame is stale. Okay, just because the metagame is stale doesn't mean all players are equally proficient in all areas of the metagame. And it doesn't mean that Little Wargame is such a shallow game that even if we had hit the theoretical skill cap of the game, that there isn't enough to express your own implementation and way of playing the game. So what if you go for like Wolf Snake, low econ beast Wolf Snake? That's different than going for dragons against Rax. That's different from getting faster airships. That's different from incorporating catapults and recognizing the strength that they have. That's different from getting airships and doing drops. What if you're the Rax player? You've got your choice of spellcasters. You want to go for priest? You want to merge in some catapults? Do you want to try and go all in? Do you want to use Raider's Shroud and make plays based off of information and map control? Not all players have the same strengths, so the metagame is going to reflect that, because the metagame is people who are the top level players demonstrating what is the most efficient tactic, the way that they play the game, and putting it, dominating the rest of the competition with that. And everyone else who's coming up has their own skill set that they are better at worse than that. There are players who are expert level players, and they're better than some players that are below them in every respect, but that's like comparative advantage. That doesn't mean that they're the best at those specific things. So, for instance, maybe you like, the most efficient tactic available, without getting too deep in the weeds here, and having most efficient tactics doesn't mean that the metagame is actually stale, just because it exists. And additionally, it's entirely possible that people aren't using the most efficient tactics, they're just using the most efficient tactics that they know right now. So this seems like I've closed off all avenues to discuss whether or not something is overpowered. So what is the solution? What actually generates this sense of overpowered? If it's not the efficiency of the attack versus the defender. If it's not whether or not the metagame is stale. If it's not whether or not unit values are overtuned. What generates the idea that something is overpowered? Because here we can make something that is overtuned but overpowered too far. It goes as follows. What if the first person to build a house automatically summons an orbital space laser that obliterates their opponent immediately? So all games just become who built the house first. We would agree that that would be overpowered, but it's not healthy to think that it is overpowered. I'm going to express what's wrong with that in a way that, oh, it's too powerful. Does it actually manage? Let's go. It is actively hindering the ability of other people to express themselves in the game. That's the way I would say it. If something is a tactic that actively prohibits the individualization of people in the game because they are cordoned off from doing that, then it may be a sign that something is overpowered. Now, this seems like I'm leaving the door wide open. So you could just make 4 forges and I lose to somebody when I build 4 forges in a row. Clearly, whatever they're doing is overpowered. No, it's not overpowered because what they are doing does not necessarily stop you from taking any one of several branching paths. You have just been told that much like pruning a tree, starting with 4 forges is not a path that you're allowed to go down to. So the goal of Overpowered is whether or not individuals can actually manifest different ways of playing the game. So let's try again. Here's one way to show that something is overtuned. Let's take the first example. Let's say there is a thing that requires little effort to do, but a lot of effort to defend against. Okay? Let's say workers die in 1 raider hit. And yeah, let's say that workers in this game die in 1 raider hit, which is the kind of thing that could happen in other games, right? We demonstrate the second part of this definition, which is the intersection between the cordoning off of possible actions and the ethos of the game. Having raiders one-shot workers is overtuned in the context of Little Wargame, where units tend to be fairly beefy with regard. They tend to be beefier and have higher hit points relative to the damage that can be done to them. They tend to be tankier and more survivable. If a raider one-shots a worker, we can say that it's overtuned, because the fact that the raider does it will immediately cordon off other actions and opportunities and ways of playing the game, perhaps to an unhealthy degree, but in conjunction, it is against the design ethos of Little Wargame as it currently exists for that to be the case. Here's another overtuned example. The catapults that 2-shot workers. There was counterplay. It didn't cause the metagame to go stale. It wasn't always you drop or you are dropped. However, it sufficiently pruned the trees of what was possible as to feel suffocating, in conjunction with the fact that this is the only place in Little Wargame where those overtuned catapults are doing that much early game harass in a game where units are tankier and more survivable. And because that was not in line with the ethos of the game, it was removed. Let's get to the idea of stale metas, right? What is so overpowered that it would make something stale as a meta? Let's say all beast units and mech units have 10% of their current hit points. Rax units are now both overtuned and generate to a stale meta, because you will play Rax. Now, it is not entirely stale, because there is verisimilitude, there is a difference of how to play these ways of Rax. However, it would prune off the possibility of Beast and Mech. It does generate a stale meta, and thus it's against the design ethos of Little Wargame. That's what's important. It's not whether or not it's overpowered, it's whether or not it's in favor of the design ethos. Little Wargame is a game where units are fairly tanky relative to the damage that they deal. Buildings are fairly tanky relative to the ability of units to dispense DPS. The economy cannot be harassed very easily or without much effort and risk. Workers are safer in Little Wargame. People want to play, and it's the ethos of the game to encourage multi-base play without eliminating the ability for one or two base plays to actually end the game. Those things, not ever written anywhere, seem to be in the design ethos of Little Wargame. And so when you think about whether or not something is overpowered, it's not whether it's overpowered, it's whether it's in the ethos. So let's go back to the beginning. Is Mech overpowered? Well, let's run it through each of these three things. Is there anything about Mech that contributes to a stalemate? People play Beast just fine. In fact, Beast is favored in the matchup. What about Mech versus Rax? Rax can deal with Mech, although with some difficulty. They have a lot of micro. The effort that's required of the Rax player may be higher than the execution of the defense and of playing Mech. Okay. But as we said, difficulty, like difference in execution, doesn't necessarily mean something is overpowered. The fact that after one upgrade, catapults can two-shot workers may be over too, because it seems against Little Wargame's design. However, a forge has to be built, the research has to be done, these units don't do it by default, there is an economic cost to allowing that to be a possibility. Okay, so let's try it the other way. Is Mech, again, does Mech prune the trees of what other possibilities there are? As we've seen, you can play Mech versus Mech, you can play Mech versus Mech Beast, you can play Mech versus Beast, you can play Mech versus Rax. It seems, and you can even hybridize your Mech for your own attacks and tactics. It doesn't seem that Mech prunes the trees as to what is allowed. Now, it does encourage other people it limits them a little bit. If you're Rax and you want to go Mass Archer and just have your units A move against catapults that are A moving, that seems really bad, right? That tree of possibility has possibly been neutered. You're probably going to want airships, or maybe mages, some slow fields, or fireballs. For Beast, you're going to want some multi-pronged harassment, and you might want to get werewolves or something like that. But there are multiple ways, and let alone in a mirror match, there are multiple ways for these things to be taken care of. So the trees are pruned, but are they pruned to the extent that all Mech and Beast units have 10% hit points, and so you must only play Rax versus Rax? No faction is stopped from playing against Mech. Mech isn't stopped, Rax isn't stopped, Beast isn't stopped. The combination of those is not stopped. Okay. Here's the question now. We've answered the other three, the ways that most people would define something as overpowered. Is our Mech, okay, finally. Is Mech against the design ethos of Little Wargame? In a game where units tend to die very, slowly relative to the health of units, units tend to deal damage that is not that high relative to the health of other units. Units are a bit chunkier than, say, in StarCraft or something like that. Is it this? Is it against the design ethos for a giant catapult ball to just go? I don't believe so. And the reason I don't believe so is that, remember, the overall design ethos, as I've defined it, as I see it for Little Wargame, tends to be, yes, there's the units relative to buildings. Catapults are excellent against buildings, and they still take many, 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 many shots. If you've ever played Age of Empires, go find out what a trebuchet can do to an actual building and then complain about catapults. Catapults don't do that much damage relative to buildings. Do they do too much relative to units? Yes and no. There are units they're strong against, and there are units that they're less efficient against. Okay. Is the way that Mech plays pruning off the other conceit of the design of Little Wargame, which is the game can end in one or two bases, but the game can also go long. If there is any area I tentatively, personally, would say that I find that the difficulty in killing Mech on 2 bases is unnecessarily high. In that sense, I don't think all of Mech is overpowered, and this is why it's good to have this idea of the design of Little Wargame, the ethos of Little Wargame. Because rather than attack, this number has to be changed, no, this number has to be, no, this number is too high, well, if you do that, then the metagame's going to shift because people aren't ready to do that. Well, what about this faction? They can't do that, and then this and that and the other, and what about that? It's just too powerful, and there's too much that you can do. If you focus on the design ethos, you get yourself to a point where you figure out what your exact moment of complaint is. The thing I would look into, that I would love to be proven wrong about with Mech, that may make it overpowered, or just not even overpowered, just against the design ethos of Little Wargame, might be the difficulty in killing the Mech player when they are on 2 bases, because of the way repair works. But you'll be happy to know that that is something that's already being looked at in the background. So whether or not it's overpowered, it's certainly something that can be overcome, either with dev time or with player skill. If you enjoy the content that I make on this channel, or for the Little Wargame RTS channel on Twitch, or throughout any other space that involves Little Wargame, please consider subscribing to the Patreon link in the description box below.